Ever bought a sleek gaming PC that looked perfect online, set it up, and then realized it couldn't handle the games you wanted without tweaking everything? That's the frustration most of us feel when the hype on a product page doesn't match real-world performance. Link is in the description if you want to check the product details on Amazon. The HP OmniDesk desktop tries to solve that mismatch by blending a stylish wood-grain chassis with a fairly beefy set of components, an AMD Ryzen 7 8700G, 32GB of RAM, a 1TB PCIe Gen 4 SSD, and an NVIDIA GeForce RTX 3050. On paper it reads like a ready-to-play machine for anyone who wants decent 1080p gaming while keeping the living room looking like a modern office. But the real question is whether those specs translate into a smooth experience when you actually sit down with your favorite titles, stream, or even run a second monitor for work. Let's start with the day-to-day feel. The Ryzen 7 8700G is a solid APU for both CPU tasks and light graphics, and paired with the RTX 3050 you get that extra hardware-accelerated ray tracing punch that the integrated graphics alone can't provide. In practice, you'll find that most current games run comfortably at high settings in 1080p, and the occasional 1440p title sits at a respectable 4555 frames per second if you dial down the ultra-high shadows. That's exactly the sweet spot for someone who streams on Twitch while playing, because you're not sacrificing too much visual fidelity for the sake of a stable frame rate. The 32GB of RAM is overkill for most games, but it shines when you switch between a demanding title, a Discord voice chat, a web browser with dozens of tabs, and maybe a spreadsheet for freelance work. The system doesn't stutter the way a lower-tier build would when you juggle those tasks. The 1TB Gen 4 SSD is another practical win. Load times in open-world games like Elden Ring or Cyberpunk 2077 drop from the typical 1012 seconds on a SATA drive to under 5 seconds on this drive. It also means you can keep a sizable library of games, a few video editing projects, and your OS without constantly fighting for space. The SSD speed isn't just about loading, it reduces texture pop-in and makes the overall feel of the OS snappier, which matters if you use the machine for everyday productivity. Now, the design. HP marketed the OmniDesk's wood-grain finish as a modern wood design that complements any space. In a home office or a living room entertainment center, the muted gray wood panel does look more like a piece of furniture than a typical black box. The side panels open without needing a screwdriver, making upgrades or cleaning a breeze. However, that aesthetic comes with a hidden trade-off: the chassis is not as ventilated as a typical gaming tower. The front intake is modest, and the rear exhaust relies on a single 120mm fan. Under heavy gaming sessions, the GPU and CPU can push the internal temperature into the high 70°C range. You won't see thermal throttling on most games, but the fans will spin up noticeably, which adds a low-level hum that can be heard if your desk is close to the PC. If you plan on overclocking the RTX 3050 or running sustained 30-minute stress tests, you might need to add a second case fan or consider a better cooling solution. Connectivity is where HP tries to make life easier. The OmniDesk includes Wi-Fi 6, Bluetooth 5.2, and a handful of USB-C and USB-A ports. For a typical gamer who plugs a headset, a mouse, a keyboard, and perhaps a capture card, the port selection is adequate. The quad display support is a nice bonus if you want to stretch your workspace across 2 monitors for gaming and a third for chat or streaming overlays. The downside is that there's no dedicated Thunderbolt port, so if you rely on high-speed external storage or a dock, you'll have to work within the limitations of USB-C's 10 gigabits per second bandwidth. So who should actually buy this machine? If you're a casual gamer who wants a system that can handle most modern titles at 1080p without diving deep into the BIOS, and you also need a respectable workstation for photo editing, video rendering, or remote work, the OmniDesk hits a sweet spot. Its aesthetic makes it a low-profile addition to a home office, and the 32GB RAM plus large SSD give you headroom for multitasking that many mid-range builds lack. It's also a decent entry point for someone who wants to dip their toes into ray-traced gaming without spending a fortune on a high-end GPU. On the flip side, power users who demand 1440p or 4K gaming at max settings should look elsewhere. The RTX 3050, while competent, will struggle to push those resolutions beyond 60 frames per second in newer titles, and the modest cooling solution could become a bottleneck if you push the hardware hard. Likewise, if you're a modder or a PC enthusiast who loves swapping out components every few months, the wood finish might feel restrictive, and the single fan design limits future upgrades. For those who live in a hot climate or have a small desk that amplifies fan noise, the acoustic profile could be a deal breaker. In terms of value, the price point.